The winter market shimmered under a silent snowfall, the night cold enough to turn breath into pale ghosts drifting across the festive lights. Ethan Ward walked through the narrow aisles of the Oak Ridge Winter Market with the steady, controlled gait of a man who had learned long ago to measure every footstep. At 33, he carried the kind of presence that made strangers quietly move aside without understanding why. He stood just over 6'2", broad-shouldered and built like someone who had carved muscle from years of discipline rather than vanity. His hair was a deep, weathered brown, cropped close to the scalp in a military cut, and his skin bore the tan of deserts and oceans that never fully faded. A line of barely healed scarring traced along his right temple, evidence of a mission gone wrong 6 months earlier, when an explosion had taken 2 teammates and nearly taken him. His eyes, a deep steel blue, scanned constantly, never still, never relaxed. It was a habit formed from a decade inside the Navy's most dangerous corridors, first as a sailor, then as a SEAL. He had once been known for a bold, almost reckless courage, but the last deployment had carved something quieter into him, a vigilance that bordered on sorrow, a hesitation when facing joy, as though he no longer trusted the world to give it freely. Beside him moved Titan, his German Shepherd K9 partner, a lean, muscular 4-year-old with a thick black and tan coat and amber eyes that absorbed everything. Titan's left ear had a small triangular notch, a mark earned during a night raid where he had shielded Ethan from shrapnel. He walked close to Ethan's leg, every step measured, every breath quiet. Trained to detect explosives, flank intruders, and track targets over miles, Titan was both warrior and guardian, carrying himself with a regal stillness that made children stare in awe and adults give him space. Tonight, though, Titan's posture was slightly different. His head was low, ears twitching, muscles tight, not out of aggression, but because the crowd overwhelmed him. Holiday laughter, scraping metal heaters, and the harsh snap of fireworks popping in the distance flooded the senses of a dog who had lived too long in noise meant to kill. Ethan felt the tension in him and reached down briefly, brushing 2 fingers along Titan's neck. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. "We're just passing through." But he wasn't really talking to Titan. The truth was, Ethan had returned to Oak Ridge, his childhood hometown, because he didn't know where else to go. Mandatory leave, the Navy had called it, insisting he stabilize mentally before another deployment. The therapists described it as operational stress, not PTSD, but Ethan knew better. It was the weight of memory pressing against the ribs, the haunting split second of wondering whether any joy he touched might shatter. Snowflakes drifted down more heavily as they neared the central square. Lights twinkled between wooden stalls selling pine wreaths, candied apples, and handcrafted toys. Families laughed, couples shared cocoa, musicians played carols with cheerful brass notes. It should have been peaceful, but to Ethan, the atmosphere felt unreal, almost too delicate, an illusion he might break simply by breathing wrong. Titan sensed the shift, brushing closer against Ethan's leg. Then Ethan heard it, the sharp, mocking laughter that didn't belong in any place calling itself merry. His head snapped up, instinct fast, trained habits firing like electrical current through his nerves. At the center of a widening circle stood a young woman dressed in a simple winter coat, with patches sewn carefully onto the sleeves. She was slender, mid-20s, with long chestnut hair pulled into a low ponytail under a knit cap. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but the fear in her wide hazel eyes had nothing to do with winter. Her name, though Ethan did not know it yet, was Grace Miller. She worked double shifts between 2 part-time jobs while raising her younger brother alone, though exhaustion never stole the gentle softness of her expression. Tonight, however, she looked fragile, cornered, desperately clutching a basket of small handmade crafts she sold to cover bills. 3 teenagers surrounded her, boys around 17, draped in expensive jackets, designer shoes, and the confident arrogance of wealth that had never been denied anything. The tallest, a blonde with slicked hair and a smirk carved too sharply to be natural, lifted his phone to record her distress. Grace's voice trembled as she tried to brush past them. "Please, I just need to get home. It's late." The blonde boy stepped in front of her. "Ah, don't leave yet? We're just having fun. Show us that smile again." "Come on, man," another laughed. "She looks like she crawled out of a charity bin." Grace's breath hitched. She held onto her basket like it was a shield. The blonde reached out and casually slapped it from her hands. Crafts scattered across the slush. Grace cried out as she bent quickly to gather them, and that was when he shoved her lightly, enough to knock her off balance. Her knee hit the icy pavement with a dull thud. Laughter erupted, and Titan growled. It wasn't a bark or warning sound. It was a low, thunderous rumble that rolled across the square like distant thunder. Ethan's entire body tightened. "Titan, hold," he ordered softly, but even he felt the instinct to intervene pulse like fire under his skin. Grace lifted her head, eyes wide, hearing the growl before she saw the source. Titan stood rigid, hackles raised, amber eyes burning with protective fury. Several nearby shoppers stepped back quickly. The blonde boy scoffed. "What's your problem, mutt? Hey, back off," he said, though the tremor in his voice exposed the panic leaking through bravado. Ethan stepped forward into the light. The teenagers fell silent. Even in a wool coat and dark jeans, Ethan looked unmistakably military, posture upright, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering, jaw cut sharply like the blade of a chisel. Snow dusted his hair, giving him an almost statuesque presence. His eyes, however, were the thing that made the blonde swallow hard. There was no anger in them, just the cold, quiet certainty of a man who had already fought worse battles than these boys could imagine. "Pick up the basket," Ethan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The blonde tried to scoff but failed. "We didn't do anything." She slipped. Ethan took one step closer. Titan mirrored him, muscles coiled. "Pick up the basket." When the blonde hesitated, Titan let out a single sharp bark, a sound trained to break focus and freeze enemies mid-movement. The boy jumped, then scrambled to gather the fallen crafts, shoving them back into Grace's hands. Ethan crouched beside Grace, his voice shifting from steel to warmth with startling ease. "Are you hurt?" Grace shook her head quickly, though pain flickered across her features. I'm fine, really. I just want to go home." Ethan saw past the words. He saw the fear, the humiliation, the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting battles long before these boys ever mocked her. And something in him, something tired and aching, recognized her struggle. He offered his hand. "Let me help you up." Grace hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was strong but gentle, steadying her. When she tried to stand on her right leg, her breath caught. She had twisted her ankle when she fell. Ethan's gaze sharpened instantly. "You shouldn't walk on that." "I don't have a choice," she whispered. "My house isn't far." "I'll take you," Ethan said. His tone left no space for argument, yet was layered with genuine concern. Grace blinked, surprised by the kindness radiating from someone whose appearance suggested danger rather than comfort. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Ethan replied simply. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Titan stepped closer and nudged Grace's hand with his nose, offering calm reassurance. She gasped softly, then smiled, the smallest flicker of warmth cutting through her fear. "He's beautiful." "He's a good soldier," Ethan said quietly. "And he thinks you deserve protection." Grace's eyes filled with something fragile, gratitude tangled with disbelief. Ethan turned sharply toward the teenagers. "Go home." They didn't argue. He guided Grace toward the edge of the market, Titan walking protectively on her injured side. The streets grew quieter, the snowfall gentler. Grace leaned slightly into Ethan's arm as they made their way along the frozen sidewalks. She found herself studying him in the dim glow of street lamps, the precise way he moved as if measuring threats, the hard lines of his face softened only by the sorrow trapped deep within his eyes. "You're military," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Navy, special operations." "That's dangerous." "Yes," he said. "But danger isn't always the worst part." She didn't ask him to explain. Somehow, she already knew. They reached her small rental house, shutters crooked, roof patched, porch light flickering. Yet, golden light spilled gently through the window, warm against the cold night. Ethan helped her to the steps. "Someone home?" "My brother. He's 8. He's probably asleep." Ethan lingered, reluctant to let go, yet unsure why. Grace held her basket tightly, still shaken, but safer now. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Ethan met her eyes, and something in his chest loosened for the first time in months. You don't have to thank me. He paused, letting the words settle. You were worth stepping in for. Grace's breath caught. Her cheeks flushed warmly despite the cold. Titan sat at Ethan's feet, watching Grace with calm acceptance, as if deciding she was no threat but something gentler, something needed. Ethan stepped back slowly, though his eyes held hers. Get some rest. I'll check in tomorrow. Grace nodded. I'd like that. As the snow thickened around them, a fragile thread of connection formed, subtle but strong enough to shift the course of all their lives. Snow clung to the rooftops and dim street lamps cast soft amber halos along the quiet neighborhood. As Ethan Ward walked Grace to her door, Titan pacing at his side with the rigid posture of a sentry determined not to fail his post. The night had softened somewhat since the chaos at the winter market, yet an unsettled tension lingered in Ethan's chest, a sense that the incident had not ended, only paused. The small wooden house before them had peeling paint and bowed gutters, but through the front window shone a warm golden light that contrasted starkly with the icy wind whipping down the street. Grace shifted slightly, adjusting her grip on her basket of handmade crafts as she leaned more heavily on Ethan's arm. Her sprained ankle forced her to limp slowly up the last few steps. Titan walked on her injured side, his tan and black fur brushing lightly against her leg as though guarding every inch she traversed. "Let me get the door," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. He reached past her carefully, mindful not to crowd, and tested the rusted handle before opening it with a gentle push. Warmth drifted out, not from heat, but from the faint scent of vanilla-scented soap, knitted blankets, and childhood drawings taped unevenly along the walls. A small figure peeked from behind a hallway corner. Ethan's eyes immediately softened. The boy, 8-year-old Liam, was tiny, thin from growth spurts and too many skipped meals, his brown hair sticking up at all angles as though it had fought the pillow and lost. He wore mismatched socks, one striped red and green, the other plain blue. His large hazel eyes, identical to Grace's, widened when he spotted Titan first, then Ethan towering behind him like a winter giant carved from stone. "Grace," he whispered, "are you okay?" Grace straightened, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just took a small fall." Liam stepped forward, small hands trembling slightly. Who's the man? And the big dog?" Ethan lowered himself to one knee so the boy would not feel overwhelmed by his size. Kneeling brought him closer to the soft glow of the house's warm light, accentuating the rough lines of his jaw, the faint stubble along his chin, and the scar that curved beneath his right eye. He softened his expression as best he could. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Your sister had a rough night. Titan and I helped her get home." Titan sat beside him, posture perfectly upright, but tail wagging with slow, controlled sweeps. Trained though he was, Titan seemed to understand instinctively that this tiny human was no threat, just cautious, fragile, and desperately protective of the older sister who raised him. Liam's eyes sparkled. "Is he a soldier dog?" "He was," Ethan replied, stroking Titan's neck. "He's trained to keep people safe." Liam took a step closer, fascinated. Titan responded by lowering his head slightly in desaust, an unspoken invitation. Liam reached out a hesitant hand, brushing Titan's fur tentatively before beaming with genuine joy. "He's so soft." His laughter filled the small entryway like sunlight. Grace watched, leaning against the wall for balance. Relief washed across her face, not simply because she was safe, but because Liam had not panicked or retreated into one of his anxious spells. Ethan caught the expression and felt something shift inside him, a quiet warmth that contrasted the cold weight he carried everywhere else. "Let's get you sitting," Ethan said to Grace. "That ankle needs to stay off the ground." Grace nodded gratefully. The living room was modest and worn, but clean. The sofa cushions sagged from years of use, yet every blanket had been freshly folded, and a small potted plant sat stubbornly alive on the windowsill. The heater, however, gave only a faint metallic rattle, no actual warmth, making the room far colder than it should have been. Grace settled into the sofa with a soft exhale of pain. Ethan crouched again, examining the swollen ankle with careful, practiced movements. "It's sprained, but not severe," he murmured. "You'll need to rest it for a day or two. Ice would help." Grace sighed. The freezer barely works anymore, but I can try. I'll take care of it, Ethan said automatically. Grace blinked, surprised. You know how to fix freezers? He gave a one-shoulder shrug. In the military, you learn to fix anything that breaks. When you're miles from anywhere, you don't wait for a repairman. Liam plopped down beside Titan, stroking his fur with deep rhythmic motions like he was trying to memorize the texture. Titan remained perfectly still, eyes half closed in contentment. Ethan noticed Titan almost never relaxed this quickly around strangers. You hungry? Ethan asked the boy gently. Liam shook his head. We ate earlier. Grace's hesitation said otherwise. Ethan didn't challenge it, not yet. He rose to his full height, moving through the small space with the quiet purpose of a man accustomed to navigating cramped barracks without disturbing sleeping soldiers. He inspected the heater next. Its rickety frame and dust-coated vents announced years of neglect. When he flipped the switch, it wheezed like an exhausted animal. Grace bit her lip. It's been like that for weeks. The landlord keeps saying someone will come in a few days. But no one ever does. Ethan's jaw clenched. Neglect bothered him, especially when it endangered people who had no one to fight for them. Do you have tools? In the cupboard above the sink, Grace said, embarrassed. But you don't have to. I know, he interrupted gently. Let me try anyway. As he walked into the kitchen, he scanned the home with the observant precision of a seal clearing a room. He noted the blankets stuffed against windows to keep drafts out, the single flickering lamp in the corner that hinted at electrical issues, the nearly empty fruit bowl on the counter, a life squeezed tightly, stretched too thin. For a moment, something inside him ached, echoing the old guilt he carried of not being able to save everyone he was sent to protect, of empty bunks and folded flags, of promises broken by the realities of war. You can't fix the world, Ward, but maybe you can fix this heater. He pulled the toolbox down and returned to the living room, kneeling beside the metal unit. Grace watched him, her eyes tracing the quiet intensity etched into his face, the concentration, the controlled breathing, the slight furrow between his brows. Ethan was a man forged in harsh places, someone who seemed to expect danger even in a peaceful room. Yet there was kindness buried beneath the armor, glimpsed in the way he spoke to Liam, or brushed Titan's fur, or steadied Grace's arm. He loosened screws, adjusted wiring, cleaned out dust, and reset the ignition switch. When he pressed the button again, a soft, comforting hum filled the room. Warm air puffed through the vents. Liam cheered. Grace covered her mouth, eyes welling with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, Ethan replied, wiping his hands on a rag. Heat's a necessity, especially for a kid. Grace stared at him, expression vulnerable. Most people don't help like this. Ethan paused. Most people don't need help, he said quietly, until they suddenly do. The admission seemed to slip out, a shard of truth he hadn't meant to reveal. Grace studied him closely, sensing the shadow behind his words. Before she could ask, there was a knock at the door. Liam stiffened, shrinking slightly behind Titan. Ethan moved instinctively toward the sound, body straightening, senses sharpening. Titan rose silently beside him, muscles taut, tail rigid. Grace hurried to reassure them. It's okay. It's just Mrs. Dalton. She opened the door to an elderly woman bundled in a heavy gray coat, with a knitted red scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck. Her name was Helen Dalton, a widow in her 70s, small and round with soft white hair escaping under a wool hat. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and she carried a plastic grocery bag in her gloved hands. Grace, dear, she said, voice crackling warmly. I heard shouting earlier. Everything all right? Yes, Mrs. Dalton, Grace said with a forced smile. Just a little accident, but everything's fine now. Mrs. Dalton's pale blue eyes shifted to Ethan and widened slightly at the imposing figure before her. But instead of fear, she offered a friendly nod. My, that's a tall one. And the dog, too. Handsome fellow. Titan wagged his tail once, his version of approval. Ethan returned the nod politely. Evening, ma'am. Mrs. Dalton patted Grace's arm, concern etched across her face. I brought canned soup and some bread. Thought you could use it. Grace flushed with embarrassment, but accepted the bag. Thank you, truly. Mrs. Dalton squeezed her hand. Let me know if you need anything. She shuffled away into the night. Grace closed the door slowly. "She's been looking out for us since my parents passed. She brings groceries sometimes when things get tight." Ethan didn't comment on the unspoken truth, that things were always tight. As Grace set the food on the counter, Ethan approached her gently. "Your job, the craft booth. You said the manager was upset earlier?" Grace hesitated, fingers tightening around the bag. "The Sterling family. The boys who harassed me. They spend a lot of money at the market. Their father is one of the main sponsors." She drew a shaky breath. "If they complain, my boss might let me go." Anger flared through Ethan, a low, simmering heat. "They hurt you. They caused the problem." Grace shook her head bitterly. "People with money write the rules." "Not if I'm here," Ethan thought, but he didn't say it. Not yet. He sat on the edge of the sofa beside her, close but not imposing. Titan settled between them like a living bridge, his warm body radiating a comfort neither quite knew how to ask for. Liam snuggled against Titan's side, half asleep already. Grace watched Ethan, her voice soft. "Why were you at the market alone tonight?" He inhaled slowly, trying to remember what normal looks like. Grace nodded as if she understood. "Sometimes," she whispered, "normal looks like this. Broken heater, messy house, and borrowed soup." She smiled faintly. "But it's still something worth holding on to." Ethan looked at her, at Liam, at Titan curled protectively before them. For a fleeting moment, the noise inside his mind, the echo of explosions, the heavy silence of lost brothers, quieted. He didn't belong here. He knew that. But tonight, the warmth of this little home eased something inside him that had been clenched for too long. Grace leaned back against the sofa cushion, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything," he nodded. "I'll check in tomorrow." And he meant it more deeply than he meant most promises. Because as he stepped out into the falling snow, Titan close at his heel, Ethan realized something he hadn't felt in months. He wanted to stay. Snow from the previous night still clung stubbornly to rooftops like a thin veil of frost, and the morning air carried the muted hush of a town still half asleep. Ethan Ward walked alongside Titan toward the center of Oak Ridge, their boots and paws crunching rhythmically over the icy pavement. The winter sun filtered weakly through gray clouds, throwing pale light across the quiet streets. Ethan's mind, however, was far from calm. He hadn't slept well. He had kept thinking of Grace, her fragile smile, the painful way she hid her fear, the thin blanket stuffed against the windows of her worn little home. And then there was Liam, the small boy who had looked at Titan with the kind of awe that children reserved only for heroes. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this family lived one misfortune away from collapse, and he had no idea what force inside him cared so fiercely. Maybe it was because they reminded him of something he'd once lost. Maybe it was because he couldn't save his brothers overseas, but maybe, just maybe, he could save someone here. Titan trotted ahead, pausing every few steps to glance back at Ethan with bright amber eyes. The dog sensed his tension. He always did. Trained to read micro-expressions, Titan could detect fear, aggression, or instability faster than most humans. He nudged Ethan's thigh, a silent reassurance. "I'm fine," Ethan murmured, though it wasn't entirely true. When they reached the winter market, the festive booths were beginning to open. Strings of lights still hung like constellations between wooden stalls. Children tugged on their parents' coats, asking for hot chocolate. Everything looked normal, peaceful, yet Ethan felt the faint thrum of something wrong. It was the kind of instinct soldiers learned to trust, the instinct that whispered warnings even when the world looked harmless. As they neared Grace's booth, Ethan froze. A small crowd had gathered. Grace stood in the center, pale and shaking. Her basket lay overturned, its contents scattered across the snow. A police officer, a young man with stiff posture and a square jaw, stood in front of her. He wore a pristine navy blue uniform, a badge shining under the winter light. His name tag read, Officer Bradley Mills. He was tall, 6 feet at least, with short blonde hair and freshly shaved skin. His stern expression suggested he was new to the job and eager to assert authority. But there was also something uncertain in the way he kept fidgeting with his gloves, as if he hadn't yet learned how to wield the power he carried. In front of him, Grace clasped her trembling hands together. Her face was drained of color, and her breath puffed out in sharp bursts of cold fear. I didn't take anything," she stammered. I swear I didn't. Next to Officer Mills stood a man Ethan recognized from town news and campaign flyers. Richard Sterling, wealthy businessman, property developer, and one of the most feared men in Oak Ridge. In his mid-50s, Sterling was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark wool coat, with a slick of silver hair combed back and a narrow nose that seemed to wrinkle in permanent disdain. Deep lines carved his cheeks, but not from hard labor. These were lines of arrogance and entitlement, the kind born from years of getting everything he wanted. His son had been one of the boys who harassed Grace, the same son who had fled at the sight of Titan, and there he was now, Braden Sterling, slouched beside his father, feigning innocence. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes held the same gleam of cruelty Ethan had seen last night. Richard Sterling stepped forward, voice dripping venom. "Officer, you have the thief right there. My son saw her take the watch. His watch." He emphasized the word as if it were priceless. Braden nodded dramatically. "Yeah, she bumped into me earlier, and when I checked my pocket, the watch was gone. Must have slipped it into her bag." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Grace's voice broke. "No, I didn't even touch you." Officer Mills swallowed hard, glancing between the powerful Sterling and the terrified Grace. "Ma'am, I'll need to search your bag." Ethan moved. His strides were long, silent, precise. Titan followed, muscles tight, eyes fixed on the situation. "Officer," Ethan said sharply, "you need to slow down." The crowd parted instinctively at the commanding tone. Officer Mills straightened nervously. "Sir, this is police business." "I'm sure it is," Ethan replied coldly. "But a basic rule of policing is verifying accusations before making arrests." Sterling sneered. "And who are you? Her lawyer?" "No," Ethan said. "But I don't need to be. Common sense is enough." Titan stood rigid beside him, reading Ethan's body language, preparing for the slightest escalation. Officer Mills cleared his throat, trying to project confidence he didn't have. "I already found the watch, sir, in her bag." Grace's shoulders collapsed as if someone had struck her. "Someone must have put it there," she whispered, horrified. "I didn't. Ethan, please, you have to believe me." Ethan's eyes flashed. "I do." He knelt beside Grace's bag, examining it closely. "Officer Mills, how long was this bag out of her sight?" Mills blinked. "Well, she dropped it earlier when she slipped." "She was shoved," Ethan corrected sharply. "There were plenty of people around, plenty of opportunities for someone to plant something." Sterling scoffed. "Are you accusing my son of—" "I'm stating a fact," Ethan said. There was no emotion in his voice, only lethal calm, the kind soldiers used right before a strike. Titan sniffed the bag, then sniffed the watch. He sneezed once, shook his head, then turned toward Braden and growled, a low, instinctive, rumble. "Titan thinks the scent doesn't match Grace," Ethan said. "He's a trained military detection dog. You'll want to listen to him." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Officer Mills faltered. We still need more proof before—" "Then we'll get it," Ethan said. "Where did this alleged theft take place?" Braden pointed vaguely toward the vendor aisles. "Over there, by the hot chocolate stand." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he snapped his fingers. "Titan, track." The dog leapt into action, nose to the snow, tail stiff. Titan circled Grace's booth once, then trotted toward the vendor aisle, sniffing with laser focus. The crowd followed, Officer Mills trailing hesitantly behind. Titan stopped abruptly near a small green trash bin. He stood on his hind legs and pushed his paws against the rim. Then he barked, one sharp, unmistakable alert. Ethan stepped forward. Inside the trash bin, partially covered by napkins and a crumpled paper cup, lay a wallet, Braden's wallet. Ethan lifted it with 2 fingers. "Funny how this ended up here," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, especially since Grace never came near this area. Braden's face drained of color. I didn't... Maybe she tossed it?" "No," Ethan said flatly. Titan would have scented her hand if she touched it, but he didn't. And look at the snow around the bin, only one set of footprints. Officer Mills leaned down, examining the untouched snow. His face darkened. The footprints match Braden's shoes. Grace covered her mouth, tears building in her eyes. Ethan turned to Officer Mills. "You have your truth. She was framed." Mills looked at Braden, then Sterling, fear flickering across his face. fear of crossing a powerful man. But duty tugged harder. "Mr. Sterling, we need to go to the station. Filing a false police report is a crime." Richard Sterling's face twisted into fury. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he hissed at Ethan. Ethan stepped closer, voice a razor's edge. "A man who thinks wealth shields him from consequences, but not today." Titan growled again, not as a threat, but as a promise. The crowd whispered louder now, outrage boiling beneath their breath. Grace trembled. Ethan moved beside her, placing a steady hand on her back. Her breath hitched. "Thank you," she whispered, broken but relieved. I thought my life was over." Ethan's gaze softened. "Not while I'm here." But even as she leaned into the relief, a heavy truth settled in Ethan's chest. This wasn't over. Men like Sterling didn't lose quietly, and he had just humiliated him. The real retaliation was still coming. The forgotten code. In 1999, a Cold War-era military laboratory in southern England was decommissioned and turned over to a civilian research consortium. The building had been sealed for decades, its equipment mothballed, its walls lined with layers of electromagnetic shielding. Among the objects left behind was a nondescript steel console labeled Unit 47B, once part of a now-defunct early warning system built in the 1970s to intercept encrypted radio signals from the Eastern Bloc. For over 20 years, Unit 47B had sat unplugged, disconnected from any power source. Internal wires had been removed, and the circuit boards had begun to corrode. It was, by every metric, dead. But in 2020, during a routine electromagnetic sweep of the lab's lower level, a technician noticed a pattern emerging on a spectral analyzer, a faint series of pulses in the 4.6 mmHz band. At first, it resembled radio static, but after enhancement, the signal revealed a sequence of numbers. And not just any numbers. The first 13 digits matched the Fibonacci sequence exactly. Then came a prime number spiral. Then, something else. An unidentified code, pulsing in regular intervals. The signal repeated every 47 seconds. Investigators traced the signal's origin to Unit 47B, still rusted and lifeless in a corner of the room. There were no wires connected, no capacitors charged, no hidden batteries. Yet every instrument confirmed it was broadcasting. Multiple independent labs were brought in. When the device was removed from its original position, the signal ceased. When returned, it resumed. When the surrounding environment was altered, changes in temperature, air pressure, humidity, the signal stayed unchanged. An attempt was made to disassemble Unit 47B. As the outer casing was removed, the signal warped, then dissolved. After reassembly, it never returned. Whatever was inside had been irreversibly disturbed. The internal components, now examined in full, showed nothing unusual. Oxidized coils, outdated circuitry, degraded transistors. No hidden emitters, no shielding, no modern tech. And yet, for nearly 2 weeks, that box had spoken in mathematical language with no power, no memory, no interface. Some proposed that residual magnetism could have interacted with the Earth's field. Others believed the device may have absorbed background radiation over decades. But those theories didn't explain the structure of the transmission, nor its eerie precision. A handful of researchers suggested a more unsettling hypothesis, that Unit 47B had once recorded something that wasn't meant to be played back, and the residual hardware had found a way, through broken time and dead circuits, to echo it one final time. Before it was dismantled, a digital copy of the signal was archived. The last 41 digits, never decoded, remained stored in a secure server. An analyst described the final line as, "not quite numbers, not quite sound." Behind it, gutted him. He wanted to say, "I'll handle it." He wanted to reach for her, hold her, tell her she wasn't alone. But he knew Grace. Her spine, though fragile-looking, was iron. If he offered money directly, she would refuse. Pride and dignity were the only things she'd been able to keep in a life stripped bare. Grace brushed a trembling hand across her cheek. "I don't want to depend on anyone, especially someone I barely know." "You know me more than you think," Ethan replied quietly. She met his eyes then, the eyes that had seen war, loss, firefights in deserts, blood and sand, brothers fall beside him. "Maybe," she whispered, "but this isn't your burden." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he crouched beside Titan, running a hand through the dog's fur to ground himself. He couldn't push Grace, but he also couldn't walk away. For years he had needed missions, clear objectives, clear enemies. But this was different. There were no orders, no chain of command, only instinct. And his instinct screamed to protect her and Liam. Later that morning, Ethan made a phone call. He walked down to a quiet alley behind the bakery, snow crunching underfoot, Titan trailing behind him. Pulling out his old secure phone, a hardened device used primarily for communication during deployments, he dialed a number he hadn't used in months. After 2 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Ward, is that you?" Ethan almost smiled. "Yeah, it's me, Ortiz." Miguel Ortiz had served with Ethan for 5 years, a former SEAL with a thick muscular build, warm golden brown skin, and a black beard trimmed close around a square jaw. Ortiz had deep-set dark eyes that looked intimidating until he laughed, which was often. Except after the ambush in Jalalabad, an explosion that killed 2 of their teammates and scarred Ortiz's back with burns. Ortiz survived, but his laughter became quieter, shadowed. "Holy hell," Ortiz said. "Didn't think you call unless we were deploying or you got shot again." "Thanks for the optimism," Ethan muttered. Ortiz snorted. "What's going on, hermano?" Ethan leaned back against the brick wall, breath forming pale mist. Titan sat beside him, ears pricked. "I need help. Not military help, personal help." Ortiz whistled. "That's even rarer. Talk to me." Ethan explained Grace, her job loss, the retaliation from Sterling, the threat hanging over her and Liam. Ortiz listened in heavy silence. Then, "You want financial help, don't you?" "Not for me." Ethan lowered his voice. "For her. But she can't know it came from us." "Ah," Ortiz murmured. "A prideful one. Reminds me of my sister." Ethan nodded. "She won't accept charity. So I need something official, something she can't question." Ortiz hummed thoughtfully. "The Veterans Relief Network, the one started by Shepard after he retired. They provide assistance to families connected to service members. I can contact him." Ethan exhaled, tension loosening. "It needs to be legitimate, completely transparent." Ortiz chuckled. "Ward, you forget who you're talking to. We don't do half measures. We'll make it clean." "Thank you." "No thanks needed," Ortiz replied. "We owe you. If you hadn't dragged me out of that burning Humvee—" "That's enough," Ethan said sharply. He hated being reminded of the night his team died. The flames, the smell of burning metal, the screams. He pushed the memories back into the dark corners of his mind. Ortiz softened. "Consider it done. Shepard and I will handle the paperwork. You just keep that woman safe." Ethan ended the call, chest heavy. He stared up at the sky, a pale gray canvas threatening more snow. Titan leaned against his leg as if sensing the darker memories swirling inside him. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned to Grace's house. Liam was home from school, kneeling on the floor, building a Lego tower. Titan lay beside him like a guardian statue. Grace sat on the sofa, paperwork spread across her lap. Bills, notices, letters from the school. She looked up when Ethan entered. "I've been thinking, maybe I should take a night shift at the diner downtown. It's far, but—" "No," Ethan interrupted gently. "You're injured. You won't be able to handle double shifts." Grace frowned. "I don't have a choice." Ethan hesitated. "Maybe you will." She gave him a confused look. A knock sounded at the door. Grace stiffened. "If it's Sterling—" "It's not." Ethan moved to the door, Titan rising instantly to flank him. Outside stood a tall man wrapped in a thick navy coat. He had warm brown skin, broad shoulders, and deep-set eyes. His black beard was neatly trimmed, and a faint scar peeked from his collar, a burn mark, old but severe. He carried himself with the smooth confidence of someone who had faced death and learned to laugh at it afterward. "Ortiz?" Ethan said, surprised. Miguel Ortiz grinned, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Thought I'd deliver the papers myself. Besides, I wanted to meet the woman causing all this trouble." Grace blinked. "Papers?" Ortiz smiled warmly. "Ma'am, my name is Miguel Ortiz. I'm with the Veterans Relief Network. We provide assistance to families connected in any way to active duty service members. A recent review flagged your situation. You've been approved for a winter hardship grant, enough to cover rent, utilities, and your brother's school fees for the next 3 months. Grace's mouth fell open. What? Why? Ortiz handed her an official-looking envelope. Your circumstances qualify, and this isn't charity. It's a program recognizing the sacrifices families endure when they support those who serve. He nodded toward Ethan casually, but Grace didn't catch the gesture's hidden meaning. Grace's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were documents with official seals, clear terms, and a check. Emotion crushed her. Tears filled her eyes. I don't understand. I never applied for anything. Most families don't know these programs exist, Ortiz said kindly. But you deserve the support. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. This will save us. Ethan watched silently, heart tightening. Grace stood before him, strong yet breaking, grateful yet overwhelmed. When Ortiz left, Grace turned to Ethan. Can you believe this? After everything, something good finally happened. Ethan forced a small smile. Yeah, you deserve it. She stepped forward suddenly, taking his hands in hers. Her voice trembled. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to thank the world. Ethan swallowed hard. Just breathe easier tonight. But deep inside, amid the relief, a shadow remained. Ethan had received a message earlier that day from command. His leave was ending sooner than expected. He would have to tell her soon. The morning broke beneath a washed-out winter sky, the kind that looked more like a fading memory than a living day. The snow on Grace's roof glimmered faintly, catching the pale light as if trying to hold on to warmth before the cold swallowed it again. Inside the small bungalow, the heater hummed softly while the world outside remained frozen in stillness. Grace sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope Ortiz had delivered. Her fingers traced the embossed seal repeatedly as if trying to understand how something so thin could carry so much weight. The world felt fragile, like a glass ornament suspended over stone. Liam was at school, and Titan slept by the fireplace, his huge black and tan body sprawled across the rug, the new leather collar shining against his thick fur. Ethan walked in from the hallway, his broad frame filling the doorway. He was dressed in a worn gray sweater and dark jeans, but even in casual clothes he carried the unmistakable discipline of a soldier. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, muscles tense as though braced for impact. His short dark hair was damp from a shower, revealing the sharp angles of his jaw and cheekbones. Beneath the surface of his calm expression, Grace sensed something unresolved. She lifted her gaze. You're quiet today. He exhaled through his nose, slow, measured. Just thinking. About leaving? She asked, the words barely audible. Ethan's silence answered for him. Grace felt the ground shift beneath her. The relief she had felt only yesterday, the grant, the sudden safety, now trembled under the weight of the truth she didn't want to face. He was leaving. Soon. Before she could speak again, her phone buzzed. She frowned and reached for it. The caller ID displayed Veterans Relief Network. Ethan stiffened instantly. Titan raised his head, ears pricking at the change in the room's energy. Grace answered hesitantly. Hello? A warm female voice came through, a woman with a calm, professional tone. Good morning, Ms. Carter. My name is Anna Reeves. I'm calling to thank you for confirming receipt of the Hardship support packet. We wanted to be sure everything arrived safely. Lieutenant Ortiz mentioned your family's situation, and we're grateful to assist. Grace blinked. Lieutenant Ortiz mentioned us? Yes, he said he heard about your circumstances from a fellow service member who cares deeply for your family. There was a pause, gentle but meaningful. You're fortunate to have someone like that watching over you. Grace froze. Her heart stopped in her chest for a full second. She turned slowly toward Ethan, who looked away, jaw tightening, guilt flickering across his features like a shadow. I see, Grace whispered into the phone. Thank you. Of course, Miss Carter. Call us any time. The line clicked off. Grace set the phone down carefully, almost ritualistically. Her hands trembled. Titan stood up and trotted to her side, sensing distress, pressing his head against her thigh. Ethan remained still, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the table. Grace's voice broke first. You did it, didn't you? She swallowed. You're the reason they approved the grant." Ethan didn't deny it. His shoulders rose slightly, then fell. "You needed help." "I told you I didn't want—" "I know." His voice was quiet but steady. "But you weren't going to make it alone, Grace. I couldn't watch you drown and do nothing." She stepped closer, anger and gratitude clashing violently inside her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're proud," Ethan said simply. "And because you deserve a chance to stand without feeling like someone had to hold you up." He lifted his gaze then. His steel gray eyes were softer than she had ever seen them. "I wasn't trying to steal your dignity. I was trying to protect it." Her breath hitched. There was no arrogance in him, no condescension, only quiet sincerity. Only a man who had spent his life making split-second decisions to save others, even when it cost him pieces of himself. "I don't know whether to yell at you," she whispered, "or thank you." "Then yell," he murmured, "and thank me later." She laughed once, a broken, relieved laugh, and pressed a hand over her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. He reached out hesitantly, brushing a tear with his thumb. "Grace." The sound of her name in his voice was enough to shatter what remained of her restraint. She stepped into him, sliding her arms around his waist. Ethan wrapped her gently against him, resting his chin on her hair, breathing in the soft scent of lavender and frost. Titan, in loyalty and curiosity, nudged their legs, then sat at their feet like a sentinel guarding a moment he understood was important. After a long time, Grace stepped back, wiping her cheeks. "When do you leave?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Tomorrow." The word struck her like a blow. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "So that's it. You help us, and then you disappear." "I'm not disappearing," Ethan said cautiously. "You're going back to a war zone," she shot back. "You may not come home." He stepped closer. "I always come home." Her voice cracked. "You don't have a home." The statement hung in the air like a wound. Ethan inhaled deeply. "Maybe I do now." She froze. Slowly she turned toward him. His gaze held hers, unwavering, vulnerable, raw. "Grace," he whispered. "This, you and Liam, Titan, this house. It's the first place I've walked into where the noise in my head finally stopped." He placed a hand over his own heart. "For the first time in a long time, I know where I want to come back, too." Her lips parted, trembling, but before she could respond, he stepped back, giving her space. "I'll return," he said with quiet conviction. "I swear it." The next morning, snow fell like whispered goodbyes. Ethan stood outside the house with his duffel bag, while Titan sat beside him, solemn and alert. The truck rumbled softly in the driveway. Grace stood at the door in her long gray coat, Liam clutching her side, trying not to cry. Ethan knelt and hugged the boy tightly. "Take care of your sister," he whispered. Liam nodded fiercely. "Come back, Ethan." "I will," Ethan murmured. Grace stepped forward. Her breath clouded the air as she looked into his eyes. "Be safe." He reached out, cupping her face gently. His thumb traced her cheekbone. He lowered his forehead to hers, closing his eyes as if memorizing her presence. "You and Liam are my home," he whispered, barely audible. "And I will come home." He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, the promise sealed in silence, then turned away before he could lose the strength to leave. Titan leapt into the truck. Ethan followed, and the vehicle rolled down the street as Grace watched, tears freezing on her cheeks, hand raised in a silent plea. Then he was gone. Winter thawed slowly that year. Weeks stretched into months. Grace found work at a small local cafe. Liam thrived at school. But some nights, when the wind howled against the windows, she stood outside staring at the empty road, wondering if fate would keep its promise. One morning in early spring, sunlight spilled across the rooftop like gold. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of new beginnings. Grace was in the kitchen making tea when she heard the sound of a truck engine rumbling outside. Her heart lurched. She turned toward the door slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too quickly. Liam beat her to it, racing to the window. "Mom!" he shouted. "Mom! It's them!" Titan burst through the door first, massive, joyful, sprinting across the yard. His collar jingled with every step. Liam screamed with laughter, throwing himself into Titan's fur as the dog knocked him gently into the snow. And behind Titan, stepping through the sunlight, wearing a clean uniform and carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a smile carved from relief, stood Ethan Ward. He walked toward Grace with purpose, each step steady, sure, as though he had been walking toward this moment his entire life. The winter shadows in his eyes were gone. Grace pressed both hands to her mouth, tears falling freely. "Ethan!" He stopped inches from her, dropped the bag, and reached for her hands. His voice was rough, thick with emotion. "I came home," he whispered, "to the only place I belong." She broke completely then, crying and laughing as she threw her arms around him. Ethan held her as if anchoring himself to the earth. Titan barked, circling them triumphantly. The sun lifted higher, bathing them in gold. A family, unexpected, imperfect, but real, was born in that warm spring light. Sometimes, the greatest miracles arrive quietly. On a snow-covered morning, in the return of someone we feared we had lost, or in the unexpected kindness that reminds us we are never truly alone. Ethan, Grace, Liam, and Titan found their miracle not in grand gestures, but in the simple, unwavering love that carried them through the darkest nights. And just like them, each of us walks through seasons of cold and uncertainty, waiting for a door to open, a light to return, a blessing to find its way home. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that even in the quiet corners of everyday life, God still works in mysterious, gentle ways. Sometimes the miracle is strength, sometimes it is hope, and sometimes it is the people He sends to walk beside us. If this message brought you warmth, please share it with someone who needs a little light today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join this family of stories that celebrate faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He guide your steps, calm your storms, and place angels, seen and unseen, along your path. And may your own miracle find you exactly when your heart needs it most.